Greetings. This is Dev, where we like to pretend talking to ourselves is normal. You might be asking, what the hell are we doing here? And I'd like to know that too. But what I'd like to do, what I'm gonna do, is I'm just gonna talk. Gonna talk whenever, however, and about whatever I want. Just because, we've all played Minecraft. Played it a million times. Punching wood, as it be. But I'd like to talk about just whatever comes to mind, And for today, I'd like to talk about lore. Because I find lore to be pretty interesting, For this game, I've come up with all kinds of lore. Some of it might be accurate, some of it might not. I think there's just something valuable about it, Makes us just think about the world around us in a different way. It's really fucking corny. But I digress. If we are going to talk about it, we should probably start in the beginning. And I guess we're better to put the beginning than the very beginning. Before there was even a nether. When the overworld was full of ancient beasts. Dragons, sniffers, all kinds of mammalians and reptilians and amphibians, whatever else lurks in the depths. And you see all these ancient beasts and what have you. They lived quite peaceful lives, as peaceful as it gets back in an ancient world. Until one day it wasn't. The world below, somewhere deep, dark, and far away, reality exploded. In the midst of that explosion, the Nether was born. But the byproduct of that explosion had drastic implications on the overworld. And that implication was a supervolcano, or perhaps several. And these supervolcanoes, they covered the world in smog. Lots of storms, burning of the atmosphere, magma everywhere. Maybe not necessarily in that order. But what happened because of this is most of life died out on this planet. The dragons fucking dipped. Sniffers sought the seas. Mammals sought I'm getting ahead of myself. But they just sought shelter. And there really wasn't any. But as those storms raged on, all the oxygen was burned and the atmosphere began to cool. Kind of, dare I say, kind of nuclear winter, for lack of a better term. And then in the midst of cooling, animals, they sought warmth, right? And the warmest biomes were the deserts. And that's why you find so many fossils under these things, because those are the remains of the things that were living here. But the main place where life survived was the ocean. Because the ocean was kind of insulated from the goings-on around it, to an extent. Where am I going with this? I guess I should mention that as a byproduct of that volcano, the magma, as it cools, actually forms copper. And that copper becomes copper sediment and runoff. And for any of you who's taken an 8th grade science class knows that runoff ends up in the water system. It just ends up in the oceans. And these oceans were full of copper sediment. They were probably like green oceans, if you will, an emerald sea. I'd like to take a moment just to get us back on track and recap. So I've been kind of rambling for a little bit now. To summarize, everything was hunky-dory. Nether go boom. Ground go boom. Lava everywhere. Smog in the skies. Everything fucking dies. Copper ends up in the ocean via sediment. And actually, in the oceans, this is the point I missed, there are actually ancient superclusters of coral. Just whole reefs. And this is important because as the world cools and we start entering an ice age, these coral reefs start taking in all this copper sediment. And all this copper sediment fossilizes the coral as it dies, because it's not supposed to have that. And that becomes prismarine. And the ocean monuments are carved out of these ancient superclusters of just fossilized coral. And in the midst of this ice age, right, we got all kinds of things going on. Glaciers carving up the terrain, like massive snowstorms, ice, hail, ice spikes so big they make their own biomes. It's kind of crazy if you think about it. And the time around this point gets a little weird, right? But I mean, somewhere around this point, the ice has to thaw, right? And I believe after this initial thawing is where we really have the first boom of the ancient civilizations. One way or another, sapient beings came back to this land. And to be honest with you, I'm not up to date on exactly how that took place, because you know, the records are sparse, if you will, you know. Since I have talked about that volcano, I'd like to touch back on what we discussed in the pilot episode of where do creepers get their bones. And I guess I should explain first that a creeper is a golem. A golem made out of the things in the dirt, kind of like a moss golem or a grass golem in some cases, if you can consider this grass moss-like. But when a creeper forms, it takes the moss and it takes a bunch of the dirt and it forms an explosive in its stomach. And it's the specifics of that process that's interesting, I would say. Because, you know, that on its own, like, okay, what does that have to do with anything, with a volcano even? But if you really think about it, it does make sense. So the volcano, the most important direct byproduct is the sulfur, right? That's the easy one. It's in the soil. And there's charcoal, it burns the trees, that's also in the soil. But potassium nitrate, okay, that's just animal feces, you know. I'm pretty sure an animal has taken a shit at some point in the past millennia in this world. But the big one was, where did they get their bones? And it's kind of the same answer of where did they get the potassium nitrate, their remains. But instead of shit, it's their bones, because as they decompose, their skeletons turn into calcium deposits in the soil. And as a creeper forms, it takes those calcium deposits and makes its own skeleton out of them. If you've ever seen that creeper anatomy photo or sprite in Minecraft Dungeons, that's what that is. Kind of a cartoonish interpretation of what I just said. I should also mention that when the creeper forms, that copper sediment from earlier is still in the soil. And that soil becomes part of the creeper, so that when it's struck by lightning, or a trident, the lightning is channeled through the copper in the creeper's body. And I know this video has been kind of disjumbled. I mean, I'm not a YouTuber. What do you want from me? But I don't know. Tell me what you think. What are your theories on it? How much did I get wrong? What did I get right? The answer may surprise you. Or not. Well, I'm done.